Hello, everybody. I'm Douglas Montgomery. I'm CEO of Global Connects, a worldwide media consultancy. I am also honored and privileged to be the executive producer of the 2021 Taiwanese Biennial Film Festival. TBFF 21 is a celebration of Taiwanese culture and creativity, and we have a fantastic lineup this year. Highlights include our opening night US live premiere, Man in Love, which is Taiwan's biggest box office grossing hit in years, and also is one of the few or rare hits that actually have a greater box office than a US Hollywood film. Other highlights in the hybrid portion of the film festival are We Are Champion, which we are offering to students of Mandarin as a free screening. The film is about two brothers, who end up on different sides of the basketball court, and they end up in the final, and they realize there is more to life than basketball. Other highlights include The Silent Forest, which is a rather heavy film based on some real events that have happened in Taiwan over the last couple of years. We do have a short section with, I think it is 11 different shorts in 2 different blocks. One block is based on what I call relationships. The other block is based on what I call awakenings. And in addition to that, we have some very exciting panels. One of the panels that we have is international co-production. Another panel we have is in how the Taiwanese tech industry can help Hollywood. And the third panel is the one you will see today, which we are very excited to hold, is our foreign content panel with the topic of what is the potential of foreign content around the world. Our special guests today are Lisa Pack, Partner Manager from Parrot Analytics. Also joining is Jay Tucker, the Executive Director of UCLA Memes. I'll let Jay give his full title because it's a mouthful. And with that, I will start with Lisa. Lisa, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa, and Partner Insights Manager at Parrot Analytics, and my background is in theatrical strategy, talent intelligence, and right now at Parrot, I do a little bit of everything with content demand. So very excited to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you, Lisa. And how about you, Jay?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jay Tucker. I manage the Center for Media, Entertainment, and Sports at UCLA Anderson's Business School. Over here, we have about 15 courses that we run every year for MBA candidates, people pursuing their MBA, focused on the business of film, TV, gaming, sports, etc. We also hold major conferences and minor gatherings. We have a number of partnerships, including one that we've launched with Real Madrid to deliver some leadership development experiences. And essentially, I am one of the kind of thought leaders and folks who run our programs here.
All right, thank you both. We really appreciate having 2 experts on our panel talking about foreign content. What is interesting is myself and the Taiwanese government had been talking about this film festival for a number of months, since I think in detail since May, and now the film festival happened here in November 2021. In between May of 2021 and now, there has been a lot of action with Asian entertainment. So I think it's very timely for all of us. Clearly, the hottest topic in Asian entertainment right now is Squid Games. I think Lisa may have some very interesting thoughts on the reasons for the success and those kind of things, and also some of the data analytics that her company Parrot has helped do. But also, what I'd like to kind of dig in deeper as well, and I think Jay can help. Jay is a huge fan of Japanese anime that I know. But I think Asian content, in my opinion, is now kind of coming above the surface as far as noticeable popularity. But it actually has been there for a while. Just as one example, Japanese anime first came to the US, I think it was in 1963 with Astro Boy, and kind of has a slow, steady climb in popularity since then. When we look at other Asian entertainment, even outside of film, if we look at music, BTS conquering the charts all over the world, that also is not necessarily an overnight success, and there's been some effort put behind it. sports, Shohei Ohtani, arguably the best player in baseball at the moment. The two ladies in the U.S. Open this fall in New York. There's a lot of Asian talent reaching the top of the entertainment heap. So with that in mind, I'd like Lisa kind of just start first. You can talk about Squid Games if you like, but again, I think you both of you guys understand the theme and what we're getting at here.
Yeah, I mean, Squid Game was a huge phenomenon that no one was really expecting. Obviously, locally, I think a lot of people expect the Squid Game to do well just because of the talent, the cast, and also people who are fans of Korean dramas would probably have watched it, but to have it taken to that level of global popularity, I feel like that is definitely a surprise. But overall, I think Asian content has always been of high quality, and we're just now getting the right recognition for it. And our data at Parrot suggests that since the pandemic, demand for Asian content increased exponentially in the US at least. And that really comes from a mixture of an accessibility, awareness, and a need for diversity in the American population. So when we have global platforms like Netflix and Amazon investing in international content now, that really opens doors to some of the barriers of entry to Asian media that we've always had. And I think American consumers now are they are faced with a smaller burden to commit to when they're watching international content because they don't have to get out of their house or pay money to go to different theaters or to watch shows online. So yeah, I think that's some of the things that we're looking at right now, a big entryway for Asian content to make its way through the American consumers.
All right, thank you. I'll ask Jay to speak as well, but you did mention a couple interesting things to me, and maybe even Jay, you'd like to kind of address it. A smaller burden for the American consumer, due to, well, like you said, the need not to go to, let's say, an art house theater or that kind of thing.
Right.
I believe the director of Parasite also mentioned how Americans now are not afraid to jump the 1-inch wall, right? The 1-inch wall of subtitles. So I think, I'm going to try to segue this to Jay. Like I said, Jay is a longtime anime fan. And, perhaps you can, maybe talk a little bit about the iceberg that was below the ocean that kind of brought us to the where we are now.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think we can get into is the rise of all these direct-to-consumer platforms, subscription services, and then the shifts in regulatory environment and accessibility that have changed what the content providers themselves are trying to deliver, but also what consumers are expecting to get. But as Doug implied, I've been a fan of anime for the last 40 years or so, probably closer to 50 years. And, the rise of foreign content isn't really new. And of course, we've over the last 30 or 40 years, particularly when we talk about film and television, the source material has become increasingly global, even if the productions are here in North America. And so that's a factor as well. But as we live in an increasingly global culture, as we live in a media environment where the consumer is really at the center, and the services are really catering to them and bringing other perspectives, other cultures, other entertainment experiences directly to the person's device or into their living room, it just becomes a very different phenomenon. Lisa, said it perfectly in the sense that nowadays you can connect with some of these other cultures and stories without having to leave your home, right? Which is not something that was true before. Also, understand that when I, as a young fan of anime, wanted to find out about other stuff, right? So if you go back to Macross and Robotech and stuff like that back in the 70s and 80s, if you were interested in Gundam or Star Blazers or any of this other stuff, you would have to talk to your friends and find out what else is there to see, right? How do you'd go to comic book conventions where they'd have a sci-fi section and you would meet people. Maybe you discover manga or something like that. But nowadays, these platforms also have recommendation engines. So the minute you sample something and like it, and when I say like it in this sense, the minute you watch it to completion, you've now unlocked a whole stream of recommendations that may come from cultures that are not your own. So we get successes like Squid Game and Parasite, but that also has implications for global sports. That also has implications for TV series. Remember also the role of technology in terms of making not just translation, but localization easier, right? And again, as people become used to finding great stories coming from other cultures, they're less taken aback by the subtitles and dubbing that happens as a matter of course now. If you're going to screen something on Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime that's coming from one of these other locations. So we're at a great point right now because I think the culture is finally caught up, both in terms of discovery and in terms of the kind of translation and accessibility, right? And it's great.
Jay, let me ask you a couple of questions. You said something interesting about to me. First of all, you're not 50 years old, so I can't believe you've been watching anime for 50 years. You're welcome. Second of all, when you were younger, why were you interested in watching anime with subtitles? Because that was something that American media and American media executives believe wasn't going to work.
Again, so this is one of those interesting things where I grew up at a time when you actually had some gateway content. So there was a company called Harmony Gold that took some classic titles that were popular in Asia and brought them to the US, but they translated them, right? And localized them so that what you watched was in English. Well, once you run through a really well-told story targeted at, really older kids and young adults, and you start looking for more, there are a couple of elements here, right? There's the visual aspect of it where for anime in particular, at that time, there's this kind of mech genre that, was visually arresting, especially for young people. But once you got hooked on kind of the visuals and the style of storytelling, which was much more introspective and much more kind of mature than traditional animated storytelling in the West, you start looking for more. And frankly, at the time, there was so much scarcity that once you ran through the 2 or 3 titles that didn't have, that didn't force you to kind of read subtitles, you were left with a choice. Do you want to go back and see if you can get your hands on some of these other titles that will force you to read subtitles, or do you just want to kind of, wait 10 years for something else to drop? So I think people who were in my boat decided this is a thing that we're going to try. Now remember, and so, I would say, while now the combination of financial incentives, local production, and crossover production, so for example, Black Panther having a scene filmed in Korea, right, has really kind of transformed the landscape. When I was younger, it wasn't so much that you had a global market for stories. You had an American appetite for certain styles of titles from Japan and certain styles of titles, say, from England, right? And maybe France. And that was really the extent of it. Now, we've moved past the kind of iPad stage, right? Like we talk about, we have, people buy tablets. Like, no, they don't buy tablets, they buy iPads, right? At that time, no, we kind of watched anime, we watched martial arts films, or really classic top shelf, like Kurosawa movies and stuff like that, or you watch stuff that came out of England or France, right? Like I said, at that time, the combination of really not having great discovery meant, and the fact that, people were not really dubbing those movies, and certainly not well at the time, that if you wanted to be in that cultural space, you just had to do the work. Nowadays, that is not the case. These titles are much more accessible. And I think it's kind of a virtuous cycle in the sense that the more stuff becomes available and the more successful it becomes, the more people are creating new content with global audiences in mind. And so the themes, the character development, the pacing, the visual style, all these things, while they have certain kind of cultural artifacts associated with them, become more globally accessible. And then this issue of kind of localization becomes much easier, right? I can then dub something or drop some subtitles and people immediately jump in, right? And I think particularly the themes around belonging, responsibility, family, honor, right, that you see in a lot of Asian titles, they translate very, very well to many different demographic groups in North America. And I would say that there's still kind of an untapped market opportunity, because I feel like a lot of those titles could do a lot better with communities here in the US that people don't necessarily pursue when we talk about things like anime and some of the more traditional content coming out of Asia.
So Lisa, Jay mentioned a few things in there that I'm sure you can jump on, right? With the Parrot analytics and the things that you guys are looking at. I mean, again, feel free to say, but a couple one that was particularly interesting to me was, this concept of discovery, and how, again, discovery is much easier now in a streaming world than before. And I believe that, Parrot and some of the things that you do with your job actually kind of relate to this.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the measures that we look at is we analyze affinity for content. So when we have hits like Squid Game, we can see what viewers are also watching. So there was a huge boost for a similar dystopian title called Alice in Borderland. It's a Japanese dystopian drama. So that saw a huge boost after Squid Game's popularity went up. And during that same time, there was a huge boost in other Asian content, like the Taiwanese drama, it's The Victims Game. So that also saw a huge boost. So across the board, there was an increased interest in Asian content. And I think that also has to say, like during the pandemic, when people were watching a lot of shows online, they hit a wall. So there definitely was fatigue for American content. Like there's just not as many shows you could watch endlessly. So there are definitely evergreen titles, but new content and content that hasn't been common in the US, I think gained more popularity during this time. And Squid Game was just one of them, along with some of the other Asian titles that people saw were new and fresh, like what Jay mentioned. Yeah, so, but overall, I think targeting a white space that the American or any country has is key. And we do look at supply and demand to target white spaces in specific demographics, or seeing what the next hit could be by looking at how these producers are acquiring content and also producing content based on different genres and talent that they use to cast.
You said something interesting. I actually mentioned this in the other panel. There was a gentleman, he's actually a British banker, and his company's been financing Hollywood for many, many years. And his belief about the popularity of foreign content, not just Asian content, but could be stuff from Europe, Lupin or Money Heist and that kind of thing. His point was, after you binge 5 episodes of The Love Boat, you pretty much know what's going to happen. And it's one thing to watch an episode of The Love Boat, week by week by week by week, but when you're watching 5 in a row, I mean, that formula is pretty cold. And his point was that at that juncture, is that when people start going into Netflix or whatever, or YouTube, whatever service they're using, and they're looking for something new, or they're looking for something different. Is that something that you guys have seen, Lisa?
Definitely. And I think bigger platforms like Netflix and Amazon, by having the subtitles available in multiple languages, is a huge bonus. And I think that's one of the reasons how Squid Game became so popular, because it had so many options for subtitling and dubbing that it reached a vast number of audiences. But like what Jay mentioned, like having a recommendation engine on Netflix that could bring you to different shows regardless of the content origin. So regardless of where it originated from, if it has a similar taste to what you've watched previously, then you're recommended that show to binge. So after I watched Squid Game, I got a bunch of recommendations on Netflix saying, these are the next shows you want to binge. And it was a bunch of different Asian dramas from different Asian markets that I wouldn't have seen if I didn't watch Squid Game.
All right, interesting. Jay, any
Mhm.
comments on recommendation engines and how that can help content? I would call it undiscovered A-level content bubble to the top.
Content and a question for Lisa, context and a question for Lisa. I would say that the, with respect to recommendation engines, what we've done is we've kind of playlisted entertainment, right? And so now you get brought down a rabbit hole, and people have been trained to do this ever since YouTube first became popular, right? That you kind of, you'll at least try the next thing that gets recommended to you because you kind of understand that now you're on a journey. And that's very, very helpful to get people to discovery. My question is, we've got these kind of hit series and hit theatrical releases. Which format seems to be benefiting more? Whether, is it that, if there's a big, movie, is that the thing that takes off on these platforms, or is it more, or are the platforms really actually better designed to help people discover TV series?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the type of content. So, for example, we're always going back to Squid Game, but for example, Squid Game was supposed to be a movie, and it was supposed to be released as a movie a couple years back, but it got made into a TV show on Binge. So we also track a content demand based on whether it's an episodic release versus a binge release. And within our company, at least, we believe that Squid Game was at that popularity level because it was a binge and not an episodic release. So I think depending on the content, sometimes Asian dramas do better when they are episodic releases to keep that audience on the platform and constantly coming back week to week to watch the show. But for shows like Squid Game, it really helped by having all the shows in one place and people just driving it straight into from episode 1 to that last episode all in one sitting and talking about it on social media. So that, I think, goes back to what type of content, or looking to see how similar content performed and how the other competitive shows or movies were released based on the genre and target audience.
Your comment, Lisa, you mentioned formats and this kind of thing, and Jay, you had actually mentioned earlier about source material. The movie that we're showing as our opening film for the Taiwanese Biennial Film Festival is called Man in Love. As I mentioned, it is the biggest local hit in years. Man in Love is actually a remake of a 2014 Korean movie. I believe I've heard rumors that Man in Love is being remade, I forget, Thailand or something. Regardless, this, when you talk to entertainment people on the creative side, within 3 seconds, they're talking about story, right? It's always story, 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 story. For me, on the business side, it's a whole other direction. But on the creative side, it's story. You mentioned earlier, Jay, that what had been happening before, like this moment, because we're in a moment now, is that source material had been coming from other countries for many, many, many years, and for the American eyes, it looked American, but I can think of many examples off the top of my head. Pop Idol became American Idol. Masked Singer actually is Korean, but I'm not sure American audiences know that. But anyway, going back to like the source material, and you kind of touched upon this earlier as well. And then, specifically for other countries, as this is the Taiwanese film festival. What potential do you see for the next Squid Game, the next Parasite, the next Pop Idol, whatever it is, coming from a smaller territory, or let's say a territory not as well known, given that really the key is the story?
So I'd say that a couple things. First, as we talk about where we sit right now in terms of consumer expectations, the rise of YouTube, TikTok, and all this user-generated content has created an environment where people will make allowances for differences in production quality. And so when you have a compelling story with, kind of an interesting angle that brings people in that they haven't seen before, if it's authentic and if it's, you know, kind of, if it's professionally done, then people will give it a shot, even if it doesn't have Hollywood budgets. So, you know, the girl with the dragon tattoo, the original film series, which was done in Europe, actually was on Netflix, I think, at one point before the remake was done, and it did very well. So I do think that there's tons of appetite for people to consume things from different markets, even if the final look and feel doesn't really is not a 100% match with what we see coming out of Hollywood on a regular basis. You still have a challenge with bringing people into the cultural mindset so that they appreciate some of these things. And so in some cases, you might have a title that's very, very successful. You know, we're talking about Squid Game, but there are others that have come from Asia and from other markets that have been, you know, performed very well, you know, just as is. But in other cases, you might have to take a format and translate it into something that folks will see kind of under another guise here in North America, right? Which can work also. And again, going back to some of those big thematic set pieces that you see coming out of a lot of successful Asian projects, you know, loyalty, honor, family, etc., introspection, growth, personal growth, those kinds of things, that is still kind of undiscovered country here in North America in terms of, you know, having lots and lots of stories that are based on those themes. And I would say that we're living in an era where the generation that we would typically think of as being the media addicts, right? The age that we typically think of as people going to the movies and watching TV shows and binging them and all this other stuff, that group of folks is much more collectivist and much more introspective and self-aware than the generations that immediately preceded them, right? And so I think there is a real opportunity there. Plus, there's this other piece that we're not talking about here, which is the long-term business viability and the fact that there are multiple revenue streams associated with these things. You know, a successful show gets you T-shirts, licensed, you know, licensed goods, toys, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Potentially spin-off sequels and all that stuff too. That, you know, is so that it's not just about what you get when you release the title itself. And so I suspect that we're going to get more shots on goal, that you'll see more stuff made available, and that people will start to figure out what they can do when they have a hit.
You said something that I actually I'm going to push over to Lisa, that I thought was kind of relevant or would be interesting to look at, and perhaps Parrot has. So if you have, let's say there is a hit in the United States, Masked Singer, or let's say the American version of House of Cards, or the American version of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, do we see reverse demand to go back to the original? So if somebody goes and they watch House of Cards, the American version, do they go and they watch the British version? I know I did. I watched the American version of House of Cards, and then I watched the UK one in that order. Same thing with The Office, because there's so many.
Yeah, I think it also depends on the awareness factor. Like what you said, not a lot of people might know that Masked Singer is originally Korean. For example, Good Doctor was originally Korean, and there's an American version of Good Doctor that a lot of people watch. But the Korean version also has a very strong demand, so that could speculate to people who watched American Good Doctor can also go back and watch the Korean version. But definitely is an awareness factor in how much people are aware that this isn't actually an original US IP. And also with the story is very important, and so is, I guess, how people are popularity of existing IP. But for, I think, international content, talent also plays a huge role in guiding the unaided awareness for the content. So, for example, a lot of the Asian dramas, they're based around fanship for actors and celebrities. So when there definitely is a low unaided awareness for dramas, it helps to have like these celebrities post on social media, and these people who are following these social media accounts are going to see the trailers for the next movie that these celebrities are releasing. And when we look at our data, there also is a huge move away from traditional research on content. So they might not know that a content is originating from a specific smaller country, but they definitely would know that it's connected to their favorite celebrity. And that's taken from social media and a lot of the marketing done on social media by these big production companies.
I think from what I hear from you right now, quite frankly, is you know the and I cannot pronounce it. I can spell it, but I cannot pronounce it. The Hallyu wave or the Korean wave. I can't pronounce it. But you know, I think this, from what I've read, is kind of been a deliberate strategy. You know, from Korea. So you have, you know, another country, let's say Taiwan. You know, they also have a bunch of good stories. Like I mentioned, we're having a film festival. We have a whole bunch of great stories. Any thoughts on, you know, can other countries replicate this strategy and kind of pull together? Again, I believe it's been more deliberate than just organic in Korea. And this has kind of given the rise of BTS and all these things.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's not limited to any country. But even for Man in Love, Roy Chu's other movie, Dear X, I believe, which is also on Netflix, that saw the same rise in popularity once Man in Love was released. So that goes back to people who watched Man in Love, saw Roy Chu in it, and thought, oh, he's great. Let me see what other shows and movies he's been on. So people would have gone back to Netflix and watched Dear X at the time of release of Man in Love, and when it was moved on to Netflix, there was another rise in popularity for that content, for that drama, for that movie. So I think it's a domino effect in the sense that content could come first, they find a talent that was part of the content, and they go searching for other shows and movies that this person was on. But it also could start from the talent level, where it's maybe BTS, one of the members could be on a Korean drama on purpose, that it drives attention to that Korean drama. But generally, I feel like for Asian content, talent does play a huge role regardless of the actual market. So it could be Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and it doesn't really matter where it is, but there's always a huge correlation between the popularity of the talent and also the popularity of the show or movie that the talent is in.
So Jay, you're sitting at the intersection of business and entertainment, right? You're running an entertainment institute in the business school. How can a country like Taiwan thread the needle?
Well, I would say that, first of all, you know, we are talking about all this stuff as if it's completely new, and we know that we've had crossover hits in the past. You know, we had Crouching Tiger, which again, released in theaters in North America with subtitles, and people went. So we know that there's been an appetite for some time. I think there are a few things that create certain advantages for places like Taiwan, Singapore, Korea, etc. One, production costs, right? So for you to be in the local market, producing locally, means that you can capture scenes, scenery, and culture without having to employ all kinds of scouts and to spend a whole bunch of money with people having to be, you know, kind of put up in the region just so that they can get the work done. You can get right to it. You know what you're trying to catch. You know the climate, the weather, et cetera. There's a lot more expertise. So there are some inherent advantages. I would say that the things that have gotten audiences most excited when you see this kind of crossover stuff is either novelty or authenticity, right? And so it's also important, you know, Doug, you were talking about storytelling itself and the importance of the craft. I think there are a lot of times when you can tell a great story, but the story doesn't actually reflect the culture and the people that you would find in a certain situation. So for example, you might have a police drama in the US where anybody who's related to police officers, you know, have police officers in their families, would say, come on, man, that's not what they do in the precinct. This is not how they, right? But the show is great. You know, you kind of, you know, well, the story's good, but it's just not very credible. And I think where, you know, there's this very, very interesting intersection, and I think it again presents a significant business opportunity. There are, you know, elements of culture from a lot of the regions that we're talking about today that are very, very strong and universal, but at the same time, very, very idiosyncratic to that particular region. And there's a market waiting in terms of kind of the clueless North American folks who have never been to those places and haven't interacted with people who are of that culture. And then there's this interesting layer of an audience here in the United States who are people descended from those cultures, but who have kind of grown up and been acculturated here in the US and are kind of in between. And where there's a real emotional connection to that source culture, but there's also this filtering lens of daily life here in the US. And so there's a chance, I think, if folks can figure out, one, how to handle production in a kind of economic way, but then also how to look at certain trends and to greenlight a portfolio. It's never about betting on one television series or one movie, but to start to kind of construct a portfolio where you feel like, okay, these titles are going to touch a nerve, and these directors, actors, etc., editors, these are folks who I think will play very well with American audiences. And then there's a big, big marketing challenge. And, you know, I know there's no shortage of marketing creativity because we just went through this crazy time on the theatrical side because of the pandemic, where people had to figure out how to get people right. But how do you get people, you know, interested in this stuff, have, you know, a quarter of the time to promote it than you compared to what you normally would have? Well, this is a sticky problem of a different variety, but the same kind of difficulty level, right? And I think that helping to start to cultivate an appreciation for projects coming out of certain regions and having an expectation that there are certain things that you can expect. I think if you went to Germany and you asked them what they think about American films, there are certain things that they expect, right? And I think you want that same kind of halo when we're talking about projects that come out of Korea, or projects that come out of Taiwan, or projects that come out of China, or projects that come out of Japan, right? You want this sense that like, oh, so now I expect that this is going to be really strong in these areas, right? And I think we can get there, but I think there's a marketing challenge there, there's a PR challenge there, and then there's a partnerships challenge, which has to do with making sure that the distribution on the appropriate platforms happens so that the work actually reaches the fans that, you know, hopefully will be delighted by what they see.
You mentioned two things there. You know, one that actually relate to something that actually Taiwan is offering through their Taiwanese International Co-Funding Program, which we talked about in detail in the other panel. So those who are interested in the international co-production, you can check out the other panel. But to boil it down, what Taiwan is offering is, you know, number one, up to 30% funding of the film, and also up to 30%, that's the priority, 30% funding of the film production budget. And then number two, up to 30% funding of the marketing in that order, which is, you know, it's significant. So, you know, I believe that they feel that, you know, this is something attractive to audiences. The second thing you kind of skirted around, but I kind of wanted to ask Lisa, was the concept of sustainability. Now, my previous position, I was working at Warner Brothers, and I was absolutely at Warner when Warner brought out Crazy Rich Asians, and it was a big deal in the summer of 2019, right? It was a big deal. It was the first Asian casted movie since Joy Luck Club in 30-something years, and, you know, quite frankly, everybody went, right? Asians went, Caucasians went, African Americans went, Hispanics went, everybody went, right? That was the theatrical in the summer. Myself working in home entertainment, which is the kind of the next market, I can tell you that the demand, the consumer spend demand, actually underperformed, right? So meaning that, you know, if all demos went to go see Crazy Rich Asians in the theater in the summer because of all the excitement, it didn't necessarily translate to the next window, and that big tent became small again. So in this case, that was 2 years ago, right? So now here we are 2 years later, and Asian content is stronger than ever, right? So my question to you, Lisa, is it sustainable?
I definitely think it is sustainable. I mean, there's a lot of work to make it 100% sustainable, but for
Please
now,
be
I mean,
specific. I mean, this is meant to help. No, but I mean, this is meant to help people watching. Like,
right,
what should
right,
we do?
right. Yeah, I mean, now you see a lot of successes associated with Asian film creators, with Parasite winning an Oscar, Shang-Chi just completely dominating box office, and filmmakers like Chloe Zhao who are making impact in the film industry. You see all these Asian content creators, and that just gives everyone a morale boost that things can be done and representation is happening. Um, so people definitely should be striving more. And one of the reasons why I guess like smaller countries aren't really making it up to the surface is because of the supply factor. Like there always is a demand for content and content from different countries and markets, but it's just a lack in supply. Like there obviously are specific genres that different markets do well in, and so like Korean dramas, rom-coms always do well. But are there other content that Korea or Taiwan or Japan can make that would um, feed the white space that's needed to be filled in the target market? So whether it be the US or Brazil or Spain, like where are the target audiences, and what are the audiences missing that is driving demand, but there's a lack of supply for? So I think with like the 30% funding from the Taiwanese government and just a support factor in having more content produced. And I think accessibility, which was a huge factor in making Asian content be more visible, that's being covered by having these big production companies and streaming platforms um, be that sort of marketing bridge. But it's just a matter of when are we going to get the production up and running, and when are we going to have an end product that could meet the needs of the consumers in any of the markets that we currently have.
So Jay, you're positioned at UCLA. You're there to help, right? You're there to help students, and you're also there to help businesses. Any thoughts from your side?
I think this is, I think we're at a moment where there are a lot of positive things that can happen. And I would say that, we have to, there's the business side, obviously, and executing when it comes to marketing and getting the right partners when it comes to distribution and stuff like that. Very, very important. To the degree that you can get data that helps you understand trends about what audiences are looking for, that can be super helpful. But I would say that this all, I don't want us to be so business minded that we lose sense of the big picture. We talk about the entertainment industry and particularly film and television. This is, a tricky business because it's the business of selling art, right? And you can't ignore the role that culture plays in that. And I think that we have a growing appreciation for the cultural contributions of communities outside of North America, but we're still on a journey. And to me, that creates a very, very substantial opportunity. And you see that certain titles touch a nerve because that different point of view really, resonates with people here in North America. Over time, things like AFM here and other kind of festivals and gatherings and meetings will be great places to have those conversations about cultural trends that we think are worth talking about. I would say that in addition to that, we talked about anime, but I think what's interesting about anime, as a kind of blueprint more generally, is that you're talking about an art form that is for all ages. And so it's a place where you might be able to try out ideas without spending as much money, depending on the source material, where you can do an animated treatment of something before you go after a live action treatment of something. I don't know if those same incentives are going to be there in certain markets, but it's worth exploring. And I would say that the kind of, again, going back to YouTube, TikTok, and some of these other platforms, there are ways to run experiments, essentially, to do really well produced 2-minute, 5-minute, 10-minute pieces that give you a sense of whether something that's a longer form story, whether or not that's going to work. And you see in some places where these different regions are actually leading culture. We talk about the role of K-pop in US politics, or the rise of esports, or there are all these things that we see coming out of other cultures that are impacting the North American popular culture. And so since we have some of these social media platforms and digital media platforms in common, that's another place where people can run experiments and see what you get, both in terms of growing a following, but also in terms of seeing what the reaction is to certain approaches to storytelling.
Okay, great. So I'm going to wrap up here, but actually, I think both of you kind of hit on the theme of our festival, and something we're trying to get across to the people participating, whether it's the short filmmakers or the features, or even others who are attending, and that number one, the time is now. I mean, again, I think this 1-inch wall and this belief that American audiences or foreign audiences wouldn't be interested in other content. I mean, again, I brought Crazy Rich Asians, and it was a big deal because it was the first time in 35 years, and that was 2 years ago, and the world has drastically changed since then, only for the better for for Asian content, but quite frankly, any kind of content. So that's what I see, and I think I hear that from both of you. And then, number two, again, you kind of both mentioned, experimentation, but intentional experimentation, not just throw it against the wall, but you got to put a plan together and be prepared to, adjust it. And, kind of like you mentioned, Lisa, you said 100%, right? It was, there was a plan in Korea, right? There was a plan. It just didn't happen. There was a plan. And Jay, you also, and there needs to be a plan. Experiment with the plan and do those kind of things. So I hope that's what a lot of the people who will see this panel will kind of take away, and that also kind of fits the theme of our festival. I'd like to thank both Lisa and Jay for participating in the panel today and your thoughtful comments. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, the Ministry of Culture, TAICA, Taiwan Academy, WatchBeam, and the Taiwanese United Fund. We thank both of you. We encourage everybody to see the broad range of stuff that we will have in our festival. Again, you kind of mentioned it, or actually you both mentioned it. You need a broad range of things. It's not just one trick pony, but a broad range. And we believe we do have that in our festival. So we encourage others to take a look. And with that, one more time, Lisa and Jay, thank you so much for participating. And everybody else, we'll see you at the movies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.